Zane Tucker didn't beg. He'd ridden through Apache territory, survived 3 gunfights, and buried 2 partners without shedding a single tear. But when he tumbled off Thunder's back and hit Leah Hammond's porch boards face first, blood pooling fast beneath his shoulder, the only word he managed was please. She knelt beside a stranger she'd never seen before, pressed both hands hard against a wound that shouldn't still be bleeding, and said what no sensible woman in West Texas would have said. "I'll get it out. I promise you I'll get it out." If this story already has your heart, friends, subscribe to our channel right now, hit that notification bell, and drop the name of your city down in the comments below. We want to know just how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Thunder smelled death before Zane Tucker did. The horse had been slowing for the better part of 2 hours, despite every nudge and whispered command Zane could manage, and it wasn't fatigue doing it. Thunder knew his rider the way only a good horse knows. A good man knew the particular way. A man's thighs go slack when the blood's leaving too fast, knew the sound of breathing that's working twice as hard just to stay even. So when the animal veered left off the old Pecos trail and started picking his way through scrub brush toward a cluster of cottonwood trees and the smell of well water, Zane didn't fight him. He couldn't. Both hands were locked around the saddle horn. That was the only thing keeping him upright. "All right," he whispered, his voice nothing but gravel and dry air. "You pick." Thunder picked Leah Hammond's homestead. Zane saw the porch first, a narrow strip of wood plank stretching across the front of a small adobe house, and then he saw the woman standing on it. She had a basket of wet laundry balanced against her hip, and she'd gone very still, the way a person goes still when they're making a decision fast. Run or stand? He watched the decision happen in her face, and she chose stand. He tried to tip his hat. His arm didn't make the full journey. He got it about halfway, and then his body decided that was enough, and the world tilted hard to the left, and then the porch boards came up fast. He heard the basket hit the ground, heard her boots on the steps, quick, no hesitation. Felt her hands before he could see her face properly pressing down hard against his left shoulder, where the wound had soaked through 2 layers of shirt and the bandana he'd wrapped around it 3 days ago. "Don't move," she said. "Wasn't planning on it," he said. "How long has this been in you?" 3 days, give or take. She made a sound low in her throat. Not a gasp, not a cry. Something harder and more controlled than either. "The bullet's still in there, far as I can tell." "Far as you can tell," she repeated. And there was something dry in her voice. Patience stretched very thin, but not yet broken. "Can you walk if I help you?" "I can try." "Then try." She got her shoulder under his good arm and took more of his weight than a woman her size ought to have been able to manage, and together, him stumbling, her steady, they got him off the porch and through the front door and onto a narrow rope bed against the far wall. He landed on his back, and the ceiling swam above him. White-washed adobe, a crack running through it like a river on a map. "What's your name?" she asked, already moving toward a wooden trunk near the hearth. "Zane Tucker." "Leah Hammond." She didn't look up from whatever she was pulling out of that trunk. "You got family anywhere near here, Mr. Tucker?" "No." "Friends?" He thought about that a beat too long. "None close enough to matter." She came back to the bedside with a lantern and held it up near his shoulder. Her fingers worked at the ruined bandana, peeling it away slow and careful. He locked his jaw and didn't make a sound. She appreciated that, or at least she didn't comment on it, which with a woman like this seemed to amount to the same thing. "This is infected," she said. "I know. The bullet's sitting against the muscle, maybe deeper." "I figured." She straightened and looked at him directly for the first time. Her eyes were dark, and they were steady. "I can get it out." Zane stared at her. "You're not a doctor." "No, but my father was a surgeon, Confederate Army. I assisted him from the time I was 12 years old." She set the lantern on the bedside table and crossed her arms. "I've taken out 3 bullets, 2 arrowheads and a piece of wagon wheel from men who were in considerably worse shape than you. 2 of them lived." "2 of them," he said. "The third waited too long." Her voice didn't waver. Not 1 inch. You've waited long enough already. Zane looked back at the ceiling. He could feel the heat in his shoulders spreading that sick, deep throb that meant infection on the move. He'd been ignoring it for 3 days because there was nothing else to do when you're riding hard through open desert with bounty hunters behind you. But lying flat on a rope bed with a woman standing over him, stating plain truths. Ignoring it felt suddenly like a luxury he couldn't afford. "I don't have much money," he said. "I didn't ask for money. I'm going to bring trouble to your door. I want you to know that before you decide anything." Leia pulled a 3-legged stool to the bedside and sat. She had the stillness of someone who'd learned through specific private hardship that panic wastes more time than it buys. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that shoots first and doesn't ask questions after." "Is that who put that bullet in you?" "Bounty hunter. Hired by a man named Wade Blackwell." He watched her face carefully. "You heard that name." Something moved across her expression. Brief, controlled, gone fast. "I've heard it." "Then you know what kind of man he is." "I know exactly what kind of man he is," she said quietly. "What did you do to make an enemy of him?" "Testified against him in federal court. Watched them put him behind bars in Abilene." Zane shifted slightly and regretted it immediately. He's got a long memory and a longer reach. His boys caught up with me outside Odessa 3 days back. I got 1 shot off before I rode. A pause. Wasn't enough. Leia was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap. "You rode 3 days with a bullet in your shoulder to stay ahead of them." "Yes, ma'am." "Are they still coming?" "Probably." She nodded once the way a person nods when they've already done the arithmetic, and arrived at the answer before anyone finished asking the question. Then she stood, pushed the stool back, and walked to the hearth. "I'll need to heat the instruments," she said, her back to him. "And I'll need you to drink about half of this." She held up a dark bottle. "It won't put you fully under, but it'll take the edge off." "I don't need." "Mr. Tucker?" She turned and looked at him flat. "I am going to be cutting into your shoulder. You are going to want the whiskey." He drank the whiskey. She worked by lantern light, and she worked without flinching. He discovered that about her in the first 10 minutes, that she did not flinch. Not when he cursed under his breath when the probe went in. Not when he grabbed the bed frame hard enough to leave marks in the wood. Not when his breathing went ragged and ugly. She talked to him the whole time low and even, which he hadn't expected, and which turned out to help more than he would have predicted. "Tell me something," she said. "Where are you from originally?" "Montana," he managed. "Long way south." "I follow the work." "What kind of work?" "Range work. Cattle." He stopped and breathed through a bad moment. "Drove the Chisholm Trail twice. Did some scouting for the Army before I decided I didn't much care for their company." "Why not?" "They had a habit of shooting at people who weren't shooting at them." His voice was flat. "I had a problem with that. Reasonable problem to have." Her hands stilled for just a moment, then resumed. "Almost there. Stop talking and breathe." He breathed. "There," she said quietly, and he heard the small, clean sound of something dropping into a tin bowl. "There it is." He let out a breath that had apparently been saving itself for 3 days. "It's misshapen," she said, turning it in the lamplight. "Hit bone before it stopped. That's why it hurt so much." "Good to have an explanation," he said weakly. "You'll run a fever tonight." She was already cleaning the wound. "Maybe tomorrow, too. I'll sit with you." "Miss Hammond." He got his eyes open and found her face. "You don't owe me a thing. You've done more than most anybody would." "You're right that I don't owe you anything," she said, not looking up from her work. "But I'm going to sit with you all the same." He didn't have the strength left to argue, so he didn't. The fever came on just after sundown, the way she'd predicted, and it came on hard. Zane had had fevers before trail sickness, once a bad case of something from river water in Kansas, but this one had weight to it. It pressed down on his chest like a boot and filled the back of his skull with sound like distant thunder that had nothing to do with his horse. He spoke in the fever. He knew he was doing it and couldn't stop himself. Fragments of things, names, half-remembered arguments. He called out for someone named Cal more than once. Said something low and angry about a fence line. At some point, he grabbed Leia's wrist without meaning to and held it. "Easy," she said. "They're going to burn it," he said, not quite to her. "Burn what?" "The whole north section," he said. He stopped. His grip didn't loosen. "He said he'd burn it if we talked. Told us right there in the yard, cool as spring water, like it cost him nothing to say it." "Who said that?" "Blackwell." His eyes were open, but not focused. "He said it to Cal, and Cal talked anyway. Said a man couldn't live with himself otherwise." Something hardened in his jaw. "They burned it. Cal didn't make it out." Leia went very still. "That's why I testified," Zane said, and his voice had gone rough with something older than fever. "Not because the law asked me to, because Cal couldn't anymore." She laid her free hand over the one gripping her wrist, not pulling away, just covering it. "I understand," she said softly. "I understand." He didn't speak again for a long time. The fever held high through the night, and she held with it, changing the cloth on his forehead when it warmed, pressing water on him, even when he wasn't cooperative about it, talking in a low, unhurried voice when he got restless. She told him about the homestead, about her father, a quiet, bookish man with extraordinary steady hands, how he'd taught her everything, the surgery and the farming and the keeping of accounts, and how to read a contract and know when a man was trying to cheat you in it. About how he'd died the previous winter of nothing dramatic, just a cold that settled in his chest and didn't leave. "I keep thinking I should sell it," she said somewhere around 2 in the morning, talking as much to stay awake as anything. "The homestead. Take whatever I can get and go somewhere with more people, more of everything." "Why don't you?" Zane asked. He was more present now, the fever cresting. "Because he built it," she said simply. "Every board. I watched him do it. Seems like a hard thing to walk away from." "Yeah," Zane said. "It does." Silence settled between them, easy and unforced. Outside, a coyote called once in the distance, and didn't repeat itself. Thunder in the small lean-to Leia had moved him to make a low, contented sound. "Your horse trusts you," Leia said. "You can tell a lot about a man by how his horse trusts him." "Thunder's a good judge of character," Zane said. "So am I," she said, and looked at him steadily. "So, what are you going to do about the men following you?" The question landed without softening, and he respected that. No preamble, no easing in. Just the plain shape of the problem set out between them. "I need to be honest with you," he said. "I'd prefer it. I can't ride yet. Not for real. I need 4 or 5 more days before this arm's any use to me." He looked at the ceiling. "I don't know how far back they are. Could be they lost the trail in the desert. Could be they didn't." He paused. "If they find me here, they find you too." "I know that," she said, not a complaint, arithmetic. "I've got no right to put that on you. Thunder picked this place. I was too far gone to steer him. But I'm conscious now, and I'm telling you, if you want me gone, I'll figure out gone." She looked at him for a long time. The lantern threw warm light across her face, steady and unreadable. "Can you stand up?" she finally asked. "Not without help." "Can you hold a gun?" He thought about it honestly. "Left-handed, maybe. My right shoulder's finished for a while." "Then you're not going anywhere," she said. "A man who can't stand and can barely hold a gun doesn't ride out into the desert alone with bounty hunters on his trail. That's not kindness. That's common sense." "Leia, the conversation's done on that subject." She stood and picked up the lantern. "Sleep. We'll talk tomorrow." She paused at the edge of the light. "But Zane, what you said about Cal, about why you testified." She held his gaze. "I think that was the right thing. He didn't know what to do with that, so he just said, 'Thank you.'" "Sleep," she said, and left him to the dark. The fever broke mid-morning in a flood of sweat, and Leia changed the bedding with brisk efficiency that made him feel grateful and embarrassed in equal measure. She fed him beef broth and wouldn't let him sit up too fast, and when he tried to swing his legs off the bed, she stood in his way with her arms crossed. "One more day flat," she said. "I feel better. You feel less bad. Those aren't the same thing. I've got things I need to be. Name one thing you can do today that's worth reopening that wound." He opened his mouth. He closed it again. "That's what I thought," she said, and handed him the broth. He lay there and fumed quietly, and watched her move through the small room. And somewhere inside the frustration, something else began to settle. Something he hadn't expected and didn't quite know what to do with. He'd met capable women. His mother had run a household and a small ranch simultaneously, and made both look effortless. He'd known women on the trail who ran boarding houses, dry goods stores, sometimes saloons, and did it better than most men would have. But there was something different in the way Leah Hammond moved through her own space. It was entirely without performance. She wasn't proving anything to him or to anyone else. She just did things, made decisions, stated facts plainly, kept her own counsel. It was the quietest kind of strength he'd ever been close to, and he didn't understand why it steadied him the way it did. He only knew that it did. "You have a rifle?" he asked her late in the afternoon. She looked up from a ledger she was working through at the table. "My father's Springfield, and a shotgun. I can use both." "You know how to use both," he said, not a question. "I was raised in this country," she said, as if that answered everything. It did. "If they come," he said carefully, "I need you to promise me something." She set her pen down. "If things go wrong, really wrong, promise me you'll ride. Don't stay and fight for me. Take thunder if your horse isn't faster and you get to town." She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "Is that what you think I'd do?" "Leave you. It's what I'm asking you to do." "It's not what I'll do," she said pleasantly, and picked up her pen. "Leah." A hard edge in his voice. "Zane." None at all in hers. "I appreciate the concern. I've lived alone in this desert for 8 months since my father died. Not one time did I survive it by running from things." She looked up. "I'm not starting now." He stared at her. She held it without blinking. "You are," he said slowly, "a deeply stubborn woman." "My father said the same thing," she said. "He meant it as a compliment." Zane lay back and looked at that crack in the ceiling. Still there, still running its crooked course from one end to the other, and felt something unfamiliar settling into his chest. He'd been alone a long time. Not always lonely, but alone in the particular way of a man whose choices had kept other people at a distance. Testifying against Wade Blackwell had been the last in a long series of those choices. He'd known what it would cost him, but lying in this woman's house in this bed that smelled of wood smoke and clean linen, listening to the scratch of her pen and the quiet movement of the desert wind outside, he felt for reasons he couldn't explain and wouldn't have tried to name out loud that he was somewhere he was supposed to be. That was a dangerous feeling for a man in his situation. He tucked it away and said nothing about it. Late that evening, Leah sat on the stool beside him and checked his wound with the careful, unhurried thoroughness he was coming to expect from her. She pressed lightly at the edges, watched his face for reaction, and nodded. "It's closing clean," she said. "No new infection. You were lucky." "I know it." She wrapped it fresh and sat back. "Tell me about Blackwell's men. How many?" "He had 6 regular on his payroll. Could be fewer now. Couple of them had warrants out in New Mexico last I heard, but planned for 4. "And the bounty hunter who shot you?" "Either dead or given up. I put a round in him before I rode." He watched her face. "Does that bother you? Did you have a choice?" "No." "Then it doesn't bother me." She folded her hands in her lap. 4 men. That's what we plan for." "We," he said. She looked at him levelly. "We." He let out a slow breath. The arguments were there about danger, about it not being her fight, about what men like Blackwell's hired hands were capable of. He'd already made a version of them, and she'd already shown him exactly what she thought of them. "All right," he said quietly. We. Something that might have been the shadow of a smile crossed her face. Just briefly. Then she stood, tucked the stool back against the wall, and went to put wood on the fire. Zane Tucker lay in the gathering dark and listened to the desert settle into its nighttime self. The click and whisper of it, the vast silence underneath all the small sounds and thought about a man named Cal, who'd looked Blackwell in the face and refused to go quiet. Who'd understood that some kinds of silence cost more than you can afford to pay. Cal had made his statement with his life. Zane had made his with his testimony, and now in this small house with this woman who'd had no reason to help him and had helped him anyway, who was this very moment setting her father's Springfield rifle on the table and checking its action with steady, practiced hands. Zane thought that maybe some things didn't end, that some kinds of testimony went on being given day after day in the quiet, ordinary moments between crises, in a bowl of broth, in a clean cloth pressed to a wound, in a woman who didn't flinch and didn't run and didn't look away. He didn't know what was coming. He knew Blackwell's men were out there somewhere following whatever trail he'd left through 3 days of desert. He knew his arm was weeks from full use. He knew the odds, and he'd never been a man who lied to himself about odds. But he also knew that he was not facing them alone. And for Zane Tucker, who had been alone for a very long time, that was not a small thing. That was not a small thing at all. He was on his feet by the 3rd day, which was 2 days earlier than Leia had told him he'd be on his feet, and she made her opinion of that known without raising her voice. "You're going to pull it open," she said, watching him cross the room with one hand braced against the wall. "I'm not going to pull it open." "You said that with considerable confidence for a man who's white as chalk and sweating through his shirt." "I'm fine." "You are not fine." She was at the table, the Springfield across her knees, running a cloth down the barrel. She didn't look up from it. "Sit down before you fall down and make me feel obligated to catch you." Zane stopped walking. He stood there for a moment with his jaw set and his pride working against his better judgment, and then his better judgment won, and he sat down on the bench by the window. His shoulder throbbed with a particular viciousness that he interpreted as the wound's way of agreeing with her. "There," she said. "Don't say there. I was going to say there's coffee on the fire, but I'll keep it to myself if it bothers you." He almost smiled. He caught it before it happened and looked out the window, instead at the flat, hard line of the desert running out toward nothing under a white sky. "How long has it been since anyone came by this place?" he asked. Leia was quiet for a moment. 6 weeks, maybe. Man from the Tillman Ranch came through looking for a strayed heifer. Before that, a circuit preacher in April. She set the rifle across the table. "It's not a place people pass through by accident. You have to mean to come here. Or your horse means to." "Or your horse," she agreed. Zane turned from the window. "Which means if Blackwell's men are following blood trail and track, they're not going to stumble on this place by accident either. They're going to have to find it on purpose. Ask around. Get pointed here." Leia looked at him steadily. "Is there anyone who would point them here?" "Depends on whether they're offering money or pointing guns," he said. "Both work on different kinds of people." She absorbed that without visible alarm, which he'd come to expect from her, and which still managed to impress him each time. She stood and went to the fire and poured 2 cups of coffee and brought one to him and kept one for herself. And she sat across from him on the stool, and they drank their coffee in the kind of silence that doesn't ask anything of either person in it. After a while, she said, "Tell me about the testimony. What exactly did you tell them in that courtroom?" Zane turned the cup in his hand. Blackwell had a land scheme running across 4 counties. He'd get hold of the deeds to small homesteads, sometimes buying them out for almost nothing, sometimes just filing forged paperwork when the owner died with no next of kin to contest it. By the time he was done, he had clear title, legal-looking title anyway, to 140,000 acres of grazing land. Leia's hands went still around her cup. 140,000, give or take. "That's not small time," she said quietly. "No, ma'am. It was not small time at all." His voice had gone flat and precise the way it went when he was stating things he'd thought about a great deal. "There was a railroad coming through. Blackwell knew it, and the small landholders didn't. Once the railroad confirmed the route, that land was going to be worth 10 times what it cost him to steal it. And Cal found out. Cal found a set of documents in a surveyor's saddlebag. Wrong place, wrong time, or right place, right time, depending on how you look at it. He recognized what he was looking at, because Cal was the kind of man who paid attention to things. He came to me. Zane stopped. We argued about it. I told him to put the papers back and pretend he'd never seen them. He told me he couldn't do that. You argued against going to the law. I argued against getting killed, Zane said, which is what I knew would happen. And I was right. He set the cup down on his knee. Cal went to the territorial marshal anyway. Blackwell found out within 48 hours. His men were at the ranch within 72. A long pause. I came back from town to find it burning. Cal was inside. The silence that followed that sat heavy and still in the room. I'm sorry, Leia said. I went to the marshal myself after that, told them everything Cal had told me, everything I'd seen, named names, sat in that courtroom and looked Blackwell straight in the face while I did it. His jaw tightened. He smiled at me, the whole time, like it was a minor inconvenience. Because he thought he'd get out, Leia said. Because he was right that he'd get out eventually. Men like that always do. He looked at her. I never thought he'd stay locked up forever. I just thought I owed it to Cal to say out loud what happened, even if nothing came of it. Leia set her cup on the floor beside the stool and leaned forward with her elbows on her knees. Zane, she said carefully, the scheme he was running, the forged deeds, the stolen land. What about it? My father's deed to this homestead, she said. He filed it in Haskell County in 1871. When he died, I filed the transfer. I did it myself, paid the fee, got the paper back. She stopped. But I don't know if anyone actually checked it against Blackwell's claims before they put him away. Whether this land was on his list. Zane looked at her. He looked at her for a long, careful moment. Do you have the deed here? In the trunk. Get it, he said. Right now. She got it. He spread it flat on the table and read it with the focused attention of a man who'd spent enough years around land disputes to know what he was looking at. His eyes went line by line, and Leia stood beside him and waited, and the only sound in the room was the fire and the wind outside, making its low comment against the walls. The parcel description, he said quietly. Section 14, Township 31, Range 16 West. Yes, he straightened up slowly. There was a list of properties in the court documents. Properties that Blackwell had filed competing claims against. He looked at her. I don't remember every parcel number on that list, Leia, but I remember Section 14, Township 31, because the territorial surveyor flagged it specifically. Said it was the most valuable parcel in the entire scheme, groundwater rights, plus it sat right on the projected rail line. The color left her face. This land, she said. This land, he said. She stepped back from the table. Just one step, but it was the first time he'd seen her physically retreat from anything. He doesn't just want you, she said. He was already coming here. Before his men even found your trail, he was coming here. Probably had plans to deal with you the same way he dealt with every other homesteader who had something he wanted. Zane's voice was very quiet. The bullet that hit me may have bought you time. His men followed me instead of coming straight here, because to them, I'm the bigger problem. He held her gaze. But once they find me, they find you. And once they find you, they find the deed, and Blackwell's case for this land is standing right in front of them. Leia was still, processing. He could see it happening, the way the information rearranged itself behind her eyes, the way she arrived at the end of the arithmetic before he finished laying it out. He was going to take this place whether you were here or not, Zane said. I know, she said. And then it changes nothing. Leia, it changes nothing, she said again, louder and steadier. I wasn't going to run before, and I'm not going to run now. The only thing this tells me is that this fight was mine before it was yours. She picked up her coffee cup, looked into it, set it back down. I just didn't know it yet. She turned and walked to the trunk and came back with something he hadn't seen before, a leather-bound ledger, old the cover worn down to the grain. She set it on the table and opened it. My father kept records, she said. Every transaction, every deed, every claim. He was meticulous about it. If Blackwell filed anything against this property, there may be a record of the challenge in here. A letter. A notice something. Let me help you look. Your shoulder. I can read, he said. Sit. They sat across from each other at the table and went through the ledger page by page. He took the left side, she took the right, and they worked in silence except when one of them found something worth stopping for. It was slow work and thorough work, and it was, Zane realized somewhere in the middle of it, the first time in, longer than he could clearly remember, that he'd sat across a table from another person and done something that mattered. He snuck a look at her once, just once quickly, while she was bent over a page with her brow furrowed and her finger tracking a line of her father's careful handwriting, and then he looked back at his own page. Don't, he told himself. He kept reading. Here, Leia said. He looked up fast. She turned the ledgers toward him. A single page dated March 1877 with a letter folded into it. She'd unfolded it and laid it flat. It was a notice from the Haskell County Land Office informing one Thomas Hammond that a competing claim had been filed against Section 14 Township 31 Range 16 West by a land company operating out of Abilene. The company name at the bottom of the letter was Lone Star Land Consolidated Trust. Zane's jaw went tight. That's one of Blackwell's shell companies. He had 3 of them. Lone Star was the one he used for the cleanest transactions, the ones he was most confident nobody would look at twice. He looked up. Your father received this. And wrote back, Leia said. She turned to the next page. A copy of a letter in her father's handwriting to the land office, to the territorial attorney general, to a lawyer in Abilene. Methodical, polite, and thorough. The kind of letter a careful man writes when he intends to be taken seriously. He must have gone quiet about it afterward. He never mentioned it to me. She paused. He wouldn't have. He'd have wanted to handle it himself before he worried me. Did he get any response? She flipped 2 more pages. A brief note from the Territorial Attorney General's office acknowledging receipt of the complaint and promising review, dated 4 months later. Nothing after that. He died before he found out what happened, Leia said. Or before anyone told him, Zane said carefully. If the case was folded into the larger investigation of Blackwell's operations, a lot of individual claims got lost in the paperwork. It's possible this property was on the list that went to the court. And it's possible it was on the list that got set aside when Blackwell's lawyers started filing motions to delay and complicate. He stopped. Leia, this ledger, these letters, this is evidence. She looked at him. Real evidence, he said. Your father documented the competing claim, his response, the timeline. If this ends up in front of the right people, a federal judge, the Territorial Land Commission, this doesn't just protect your deed. This adds to the case against Blackwell. Shows the pattern going back further than anyone's proven so far. If it ends up in front of the right people, she said. Yes. And right now, the people it's most likely to end up in front of are Blackwell's. Yes, he said again. She closed the ledger and put both hands flat on the cover. Then we need to get it somewhere safe, she said. Before they get here. Where? She thought for a moment. There's a man named Aldous Frick in Sweetwater. He was my father's lawyer. If I sent him this ledger by rider... Do you have a rider to send? She stopped. They looked at each other. No, she said slowly. No, I don't. And if you ride yourself, you leave the homestead empty, and if they come while you're gone. There's nothing here but furniture and livestock, she said, and a man who can't quite stand up straight yet. I'm standing fine. You grabbed the table 3 times in the last hour. He hadn't thought she'd noticed. Twice, he said. She didn't argue the number. She picked up the ledger and carried it to the trunk and set it at the bottom under the folded quilts. I'll think on it tonight, she said. There may be another way. She looked back at him over her shoulder. Eat something. You're no good to either of us empty. He ate. She cooked, which she did the same way she did everything, without wasted motion, without fuss. Beans and salt pork and cornbread from a pan, she swung over the fire with the ease of long practice. She brought him a plate without asking if he wanted it, and he ate without asking what it was, and the quiet between them had a different quality now. Less the quiet of two strangers in close quarters, and more the quiet of two people who'd arrived at an understanding that didn't need to be stated out loud. He was washing his plate at the basin when she said from across the room, "You should know something." He looked at her. "When my father filed that response to the land office," she said, "he told me later not about the claim, but about the way things were going in this county. He said there are two kinds of people who build things worth having. The ones who build to hold, and the ones who build to use." She met his eyes. He said the first kind is always going to have trouble with the second kind, because the second kind will always want what the first kind has. A pause. "He built this place to hold. Whatever comes next, I want you to know that." Zane set the plate down. He stood there for a moment with water on his hands, and the fire's warmth on his back, and this woman's steady gaze on his face. "Your father," he said, "sounds like he was a good man." "He was the best man I ever knew," she said simply. Something moved in Zane's chest, not painfully, but with the particular ache of a thing that's been closed a long time, beginning to open. He turned back to the basin and dried his hands on the cloth hanging beside it, and didn't say anything else, because there was nothing he could say that would add to what she'd just told him without diminishing it. Later, when the fire had burned low and the last of the light had gone out of the sky, he was sitting by the window with the Colt across his knees, left-handed like he'd told her, which was awkward but workable when he heard it. It was faint, far off, the kind of sound the desert plays tricks with, stretching it and folding it until you can't be certain of direction or distance. But Zane Tucker had spent enough nights in enough open country to know the difference between the desert's tricks and the things the desert was actually telling you, and what the desert was telling him right now, in the particular way that a loose stone rolls, and a horse shifts its weight, and a man tries very hard to be quiet, but cannot be entirely quiet because the desert amplifies everything. He was on his feet before he'd made a conscious decision to stand. "Leia," he said. She appeared in the doorway to the back room fully dressed, the shotgun already in her hands. She'd heard it too. "How many?" she asked. He held up two fingers. "Scouts," she said quietly. "Checking the place before the rest come in," he agreed. His voice was barely above a breath. "They're not coming tonight, not with just two. They're looking. They'll see the light. I know." He moved to the fire and put it out with the water bucket, and the room went dark except for the thin silver of moonlight through the window. "If they've been watching long enough, they already know someone's here." "Do they know it's you?" "Not yet." He turned to where her shape was in the darkness. "But they will." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was completely level, and he thought for the 100th time that Leia Hammond was either the bravest person he'd ever encountered or the most dangerous kind of calm, the kind that holds perfectly still, precisely because it's already decided what it will do when the moment comes. "Then we'd better be ready," she said, "before they go back and tell the others." They didn't speak again for a full 3 minutes. 3 minutes of standing in the dark with their backs to opposite walls and their eyes on the window, listening to the desert, the way you listen to a man who's trying very hard not to breathe. Then one of the scouts did something careless. A horse shifted, and a spur rang against a stirrup iron just once, just briefly, but in that silence it was loud as a gunshot. "South side," Zane said under his breath. 40 yards, maybe 50. I heard it. They're not moving closer. They're watching, she said. Counting windows, counting light. We killed the light too fast, he said. They'll know someone's inside and knows they're there. Does that change anything? He thought about it honestly. Makes them more careful. Could buy us an hour before they ride back. He turned toward her shape in the dark. Leia, I need to go out there. No. Just listen. I said no. Her voice was quiet and final. You go out that door left-handed with a wound that's 4 days old, and those 2 men will put you in the ground before you clear the porch. I'm not going out shooting. I'm going out talking. Silence. Talking, she repeated. If they don't know yet that it's me in here talking, gives them nothing to bring back to the others, except that a woman lives here alone, and a drifter stopped to rest. They ride back, they report nothing useful, and Blackwell's men waste time looking somewhere else. He paused. If they do know it's me, then we find out now, instead of at dawn with 6 men instead of 2. Leia was quiet for long enough that he could hear her thinking. And if they recognize your voice, then we deal with that when it happens. That's not a plan, Zane. That's an improvisation. Most plans turn into improvisations, he said. At least this one starts honest. Another silence. Then she said, I go with you. Leia, I go with you, or neither of us goes. This is my land. A woman on her own porch asking strangers to identify themselves and move along, that's ordinary. A man slipping out the door sideways at midnight is not. She moved past him toward the door. Besides, you just admitted you need your left hand for the gun. You'll want your right hand free for something. He didn't argue because she was correct on every point, and they both knew it. She opened the door slow and stepped out first, which he didn't like and couldn't prevent, and she stood on the porch with her spine straight and the shotgun resting easy in the crook of her arm, in the way of a woman who's held a long gun all her life. I can hear you out there, she called into the dark. Her voice was clear and steady and carried like she'd practiced it. State your business or ride on. Nothing for a moment. Then a voice came from the south from behind the brush line where the sound of the spur had placed them. Just passing through, ma'am. No trouble. Men passing through don't stop and watch a house in the dark, she said. That's men with a purpose, so I'll ask again, state it. A pause. The sound of 2 men conferring in low tones that didn't carry. Then, we're looking for someone. Man on a dark horse, tall, riding out of Odessa 4 or 5 days back. You see anybody like that? Zane was 1 step behind her and 1 step to the left, flat against the wall beside the doorframe, Colt in his left hand. He watched the brush line, and he breathed slow, and he waited. Describe him better than that, Leia said. Half the men in West Texas ride dark horses. This one's carrying a wound, left shoulder. He's bleeding. I haven't seen anyone like that, she said. There a reward posted. Another pause. They hadn't expected the question. Why? Because if there's a reward, I'd have remembered harder, she said simply. One of the men laughed, surprised out of it the way people laugh when something catches them off guard. $200, posted in Odessa and Sweetwater. I'll remember harder going forward, Leia said. Now ride on. I'm alone here and I don't like men I can't see lurking around my property after dark. You got what you came for. A longer silence this time. Zane's hand tightened on the Colt. If they pushed, if they decided to come closer and have a real look inside, yes, ma'am, the voice said finally. Sorry to bother you. The sound of hooves moving south, steady, not hurried, trying to sound casual. He waited until he couldn't hear them anymore, and then he waited another full minute after that. Inside, he said quietly. They went inside. She closed the door and stood with her back against it and let out 1 long, controlled breath. They believed you, he said. They weren't sure, she said. There's a difference. She turned and found his face in the dark. They'll go back and report a woman alone and a stranger who might be sheltering nearby. Blackwell's men will come back, all of them. But not tonight. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she agreed. He struck a match and lit 1 small candle, enough to see by, not enough to show much through the window, and they stood across from each other with the small flame between them and a conversation that didn't need words happening above it. How's your shoulder? She asked. It's fine. She walked to him, reached up without asking, and pressed 2 fingers lightly against the bandage through his shirt. He held very still. Her expression was professional, and her hands were steady, but they were standing closer than they'd stood before, and he was aware of it with a particular sharpness that he didn't let reach his face. "It's fine," she said, stepping back. "This time. I told you." "Don't make a habit of proving me wrong," she said. "I'm not used to it." Despite everything, the men who'd just ridden away the morning that was coming with its own specific dangers, he almost smiled at that. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a moment, with something complicated in her face. Not fear and not uncertainty, more like the expression of a person doing the arithmetic on something they've been putting off adding up. "Get some sleep," she said finally. "I'll take the first watch." "You should sleep." "I won't," she said. "So it's not worth arguing about." He slept because his body insisted on it, and when he woke in the gray light before full dawn, she was sitting at the table with the Springfield across her knees, and her father's ledger open in front of her, and her coffee gone cold beside her elbow. She hadn't slept at all. He could see it in the set of her shoulders, and the careful way she held herself. He made fresh coffee without being asked, and set a cup beside her without a word, and went to the window. The desert was still and pale, and gave nothing away. "How do you want to do this?" he said. "I've been thinking on that," she said. She turned a page in the ledger. "The problem isn't the fight. We can manage the fight, or at least we can manage it better than they're expecting, because they're expecting a wounded man and a woman, and we are both of those things, but we are also something else. Which is, we're on our ground," she said. "They're coming to us. That matters." She looked up. "I want to send the ledger to Aldous Frick in Sweetwater before they get here." "There's no one to send. There was a boy," she said. "Jim Alderman's son from the ranch about 8 miles east. He comes by once a week to check on me, his father's arrangement, not mine. He's due today or tomorrow." She closed the ledger and set her hands flat on it. "If he comes before they do, I give him the ledger and a letter and his father's name to hand it to nobody but Frick, personally. If Frick files this with the Land Commission today, the deed is on record as contested before Blackwell can touch it legally. And if they come before the boy does—" Her jaw set. "Then we hold until he gets here anyway." Zane drank his coffee and thought about the 2 scouts and the way they'd conferred in low voices and the direction they'd ridden back. They're camped south, maybe 3 miles. They'll wait for daylight to regroup, then come in from at least 2 directions. He set the cup down. "We need a way to slow them down, make them uncertain." "How?" "One of us needs to be visible in a place they don't expect," he said. "Not hiding, present, out in the open doing something ordinary. It puts them off their plan. They came for a wounded man, holed up afraid, and instead they find a woman feeding her chickens like it's any other morning," Leia said slowly. He looked at her. "I wasn't going to suggest." "It's a good suggestion," she said. "I'm out in the yard, visible and ordinary. They hold back longer trying to make sense of it. You're inside positioned, and you have time to choose when it starts instead of them choosing. It puts you in the open." "I've been in the open my whole life," she said. "I know how to move in it." She stood and straightened her dress and picked up her coffee cup. "Write me a list, best positions inside the house, distances to the brush line, which approach gives them cover and which doesn't." She went to pour more coffee. "You know how men like this move. Teach me," he taught her. They spent the next hour at the table with a rough sketch of the property between them, and he told her everything he knew about how bounty hunters and hired guns approached a building, the angles they favored, the positions they took, the signals they used between each other that you could read if you knew what to look for. She listened without interrupting, and asked sharp questions when she needed to, and remembered everything the first time he said it. He'd trained Green Army scouts who couldn't do that. "You learn fast," he said. "I've always had to," she said without self-pity or pride. Just fact. They were still at the table when thunder made a sound in the lean-to, not alarm, not the sharp warning call of a horse that smells threat. Something more curious than that. A familiar sound. A person approaching sound. Zane was at the window in 3 steps. A boy, maybe 14, riding a brown pony at an easy trot down the track from the east. Worn hat, dusty clothes, saddlebag over the pony's rump. Jim Alderman's son arriving exactly when Leia had said he might. "That's him," she said from beside Zane. "That's Thomas Alderman." He came from the east, same direction those 2 scouts weren't. Zane's voice dropped. "Go meet him. Normal. Don't hurry." She went. He watched through the window as she walked out to meet the boy with the ease of someone expecting a regular visitor. He couldn't hear the words, but he could read the shape of it. Her handing him the ledger in its oilcloth wrapping, then a folded letter, then speaking carefully and watching him nod. The boy's face went from easy to serious, and then to the particular expression of a young person who understands they've been trusted with something real. She pressed something into his hand coin, probably more than she could afford, and he tucked it away and turned the pony east without a backward look. Fast, but not panicked. Good boy. She walked back to the porch and came inside and closed the door. "He understands," she said. "He'll ride straight to Sweetwater, won't stop." "Good," Zane said. "Whatever happens today, that ledger gets to Frick." "Yes." She looked at him. "Then we're ready." They waited. The morning stretched out in that particular way that mornings before, violence tend to stretch elastic, dishonest, full of ordinary light that has no business being so ordinary. A hawk moved somewhere overhead. The wind came and went. Zane was at the north window when he saw the first one. Rider coming in slow from the southwest, picking his way through the scrub with the deliberate pace of a man who isn't trying to arrive fast, but is trying to arrive unseen. He was doing a poor job of the second part. "Southwest," he said. Leia had the Springfield up before he finished the word. "How many can you see?" "1, but there are more." He watched the rider's eyes moving, checking sightlines, checking the house. "He's the distraction. The others are already moving." "South. South and east both, I'd reckon." He pulled back from the window. "They're trying to box us." "Then we don't let them finish the box," she said. You said the best defense against a surround is to break it at one corner before it closes." "I said that. The east side. That's where they're thinnest. They weren't expecting us to be watching east because the scouts came from the south." "Leia." "I'm right," she said. And she was, and they both knew it, and he hated that she was right in this particular moment, with this particular implication. "All right," he said. "East door. But you stay behind me." "Behind you," she agreed. And there was something in the word agree that meant, "I'll be immediately beside you, but I understand you need to believe I'll be behind you." He let it go, because there was no time for anything else. They moved to the east door. He opened it a crack and looked out, and saw the second man closer than he'd expected, 30 yards off, trying to hold position behind a stand of mesquite, and doing a reasonable job of it. If Zane had been at the north window another 2 minutes, he'd have had no idea this man existed until the box was closed. But he wasn't at the north window. He pushed the door open and stepped out and said loud and flat, "I can see you. Step out with your hands up, or I put this round through that mesquite right now." A long pause. Then the man stepped out. Hands at his shoulders, face set hard. Young 25 at most, with the look of someone doing a job and not enjoying the current development of it. "Where's the rest of your party?" Zane said. The man didn't answer. "They're positioning," Leia said quietly from beside him. Yes, beside him, not behind, and there was nothing to do about it now. "They heard you call out. They're adjusting." She was right again. He could hear it, the subtle change in the movement sounds from the south side, the small reorganization of men who'd had their plan partially disrupted and were adapting. "How many came with you?" Zane said to the man in front of him. The man looked past him at Leia. Something moved in his face, reluctance, or something close to it. 4, he said. "Not counting me." 5 total then. "Who hired you?" "You know who hired me." "I want to hear you say it." The man's jaw tightened. "Blackwell." "Wade Blackwell," Zane said. "Who is, last I checked, sitting in the territorial prison in Huntsville." Last you checked, the man said, and something in his tone made the hair on Zane's arms go up. What does that mean? Leia asked. The man looked at them both with an expression that was not quite a smile. It means you've been worried about the wrong thing, Tucker. You've been watching for us for 4 days. He paused. Let the silence do the work. Blackwell's been out since Monday. The word hit Zane somewhere behind his sternum. Out. His lawyers filed an appeal 2 months ago, the man continued. Judge in Austin granted it Thursday. Procedural error in the original testimony collection. He looked at Zane steadily. Specifically, the way your sworn statement was recorded. Blackwell's lawyer argued it wasn't properly witnessed. That's a lie, Zane said. The words came out flat and cold. There were 2 witnesses in that room. There were. But one of them died last spring, and the other one well. The man tilted his head slightly. The other one signed an affidavit last week saying he didn't actually witness the signing. Said he stepped out of the room first. Leia made a sound beside him, small, sharp. He bought the witness, Zane said. Even to himself, his voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere very far away. He bought the last witness from inside a prison cell. Wade Blackwell, the man said simply, is a thorough man. And then from behind them, from the south side of the house, where they'd left the north wall unwatched in the last 2 minutes, they heard the slow, particular sound of a man's boot hitting a porch board. Deliberate, unhurried. The sound of a man who has arrived exactly where he intended to be. Mr. Tucker, said a voice from the porch. Low-measured, almost pleasant. The voice of a man who'd smiled across a courtroom for an entire day without once losing his composure. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. Zane turned. Wade Blackwell stood on Leia Hammond's porch with a rifle across his arm and 4 men fanning out behind him. And he was smiling the exact same smile he'd worn in that Abilene courtroom 3 years ago. And you must be Miss Hammond, Blackwell said, looking past Zane as if he weren't entirely there. I believe we have some business to discuss, regarding your deed. He looked around the property with the calm appreciation of a man surveying something he already considers his. Nice piece of land your father chose. Very nice indeed. His eyes came back to Zane. Drop the gun, Tucker. Both of you. Let's talk like civilized people. Zane's hand tightened on the Colt. Beside him, he felt Leia go very still. Not with fear, he knew her well enough now to know the difference between her fear and her fury. And what was moving through her right now was not fear at all. This land, she said, her voice carrying clean across the yard, was filed and recorded in Haskell County in 1871. My father built every board of that house with his own hands. And there is not one thing civilized about what you're doing here. Blackwell tilted his head, looked at her with what appeared to be genuine interest. Well, he said softly, you've got some steel in you. You have no idea, Leia said. Blackwell smiled at that, the slow, considered smile of a man who has heard defiant things from people in difficult positions before, and found that time tends to settle such defiance considerably. I appreciate spirit, he said. He stepped off the porch easy and unhurried like a man taking an evening walk. His 4 men held their positions 2 east, 2 flanking south, and the one in front of Zane hadn't moved his hands from shoulder height. It's a quality I've always respected. Your father had it too, Miss Hammond. That letter he sent to the land office back in '77, that took nerve. He glanced at Zane. You told her about the property, about what it's worth. She found out herself, Zane said. Smart woman. Blackwell stopped 10 feet away. He looked at the Colt in Zane's left hand, with an expression of mild interest, the way a man looks at a detail he's already accounted for. You're not going to shoot me, Tucker. Give me a reason not to. Because I've got 4 men who'll put you both in the ground before the echo finishes, he said pleasantly. And because you're not a killer. You never were. That's what I always found most interesting about you. You testified against me with all that righteous conviction, and you had every legal right to finish it right there in that courtroom when you had me in front of you, and you didn't. He tilted his head. You stepped back and let the law handle it. A man who does that is a man who believes in procedure, in order. A pause. Men like that don't shoot unless they have to. Consider this having to, Zane said. Tucker. Blackwell's voice stayed level. I want the deed, that's all. Miss Hammond signs the land over. I'll have papers drawn up fair and legal price that's more than reasonable, and everyone here walks away without a scratch. That land's not for sale, Leia said. Everything's for sale, Blackwell said, not unkindly. That's the first principle of commerce. Then I'll rephrase, she said. It's not for sale to you. Something shifted in Blackwell's expression, not anger, not quite. More like the adjustment a man makes when he realizes the conversation is going to take longer than he'd budgeted. He looked at her with a new attention, reassessing. You sent something, he said quietly. This morning. That boy on the pony, I had a man watching the East Road. What did you send? Leia said nothing. Blackwell looked at Zane. Zane said nothing either. The ledger, Blackwell said, and his voice had changed just slightly, just at the edges, the pleasantness pulling thin. Your father kept records. Of course he did. Careful man. He turned this over. Where'd you send it? Somewhere you won't get to it, Leia said. The thin edge in Blackwell's voice sharpened another degree. Miss Hammond, I've been doing this for 15 years across 4 territories. I've dealt with land offices, territorial courts, federal judges, and 3 different attorneys general. Whatever your father wrote down in whatever book he kept, I have lawyers who can bury it in motions and counterfilings until neither of us is alive to see it resolved. He spread his hands. So let's not pretend a ledger changes the balance of what's happening here. It changes it enough, Zane said. How? Because the man she sent it to is Aldous Frick, Zane said. He watched Blackwell's face carefully. In Sweetwater. A beat. Small but real. Blackwell knew the name he could see it land. Frick's been building a federal case against Lone Star Land Consolidated Trust for 8 months, Zane said. I know that because the territorial marshal told me when he asked me to keep my ears open after the Abilene trial. Whatever's in that ledger, dates notices your company's name against Hammond's deed, goes straight into a federal case file, not a county clerk's office where your lawyers can manage it. Federal. He held Blackwell's eyes. Your witness bought you out of one courtroom. He won't buy you out of a federal inquiry. The silence that followed was a different quality of silence than the ones before it. Blackwell stood very still. The smile had not gone away. It was too disciplined a smile to go away on its own, but something behind it had changed. The calculation was running. Zane could almost see it happening. You're bluffing, Blackwell said. I've been working with the marshal's office for 7 months, Zane said. I didn't testify against you in Abilene because Cal died and I had to. I testified because I was already talking to federal investigators. I've been talking to them since before you were arrested. He let that sit. Cal was the one who told me to. He said if something happened to him, I needed to make sure it didn't stop with one trial. Leia's head turned toward him, the smallest movement barely perceptible. He hadn't told her this. There hadn't been time, and there had been reasons beyond time. Blackwell's jaw tightened. You're saying you're a federal informant. I'm saying I'm a witness who's been building something larger than what you went to prison for, Zane said. And I'm saying that ledger is the last piece. The piece that takes your land scheme from 4 counties to 6. He didn't blink. Shoot me, Wade, and you hand the federal marshal everything he needs to come for you with authority that no bought witness and no procedural appeal is going to touch. The man who'd had his hands up at shoulder height was watching Blackwell. The 4 at the flanks were watching Blackwell. Everyone in that yard was watching Blackwell, waiting to see which way the calculation broke. For 6 full seconds, nothing happened. Then one of the flank men said, "Boss?" And Blackwell said without looking at him, "Quiet." 6 more seconds. Zane's shoulder was burning. His left hand on the Colt was steady, but his arm was not. He could feel the tremble starting just above the elbow, the wound making its opinion known about holding a gun at extension. He had maybe 2 more minutes of this before his arm told him it was done, regardless of what his will said. He did not let any of that reach his face. "Here's what's going to happen," Leia said. Everyone looked at her, including Blackwell. She had the Springfield up now, properly shouldered the barrel steady in a way that said she'd made this shot before, or one very like it. "You and your men are going to get on your horses," she said. "You're going to ride south. You're going to keep riding until you're out of Haskell County, and you're going to let your lawyers do whatever they're going to do, in whatever court they're going to do it in." Her voice did not shake. "Because the alternative is that this conversation ends here today, and however it ends for us, it ends worse for you. A federal informant shot on private land by a man just released from prison on a procedural appeal." She let that picture build. "Tell me, that doesn't put you back in Huntsville inside of a month." Blackwell looked at her for a long time. The measuring look of a man who has spent his life evaluating opponents and has encountered fewer than expected who surprised him. "You're asking me to walk away," he said. "I'm telling you to," she said, "on the strength of a bluff. On the strength of a ledger that's already in Sweetwater," she said, "and a federal witness who's still breathing, and 6 men standing here who just heard this entire conversation and will be asked to account for it." Blackwell's eyes moved to his own men, counting, measuring something else now. "Boss," the man at shoulder height said again, and his voice had a different tone this time. Not urgency, something closer to warning. "The South Road." Blackwell turned. They all turned. 3 riders coming in from the south at a steady pace, not rushing, not sneaking. Coming the way lawmen come, with the particular unhurried confidence of men who have authority and know it and don't need to perform it. The one in front wore a badge that caught the morning light. Zane exhaled. One long, quiet breath. "That boy rode to Sweetwater," Leia said quietly, not to anyone in particular. "But his father's ranch is only 8 miles east, and his father knows the deputy sheriff well." Blackwell turned back to her very slowly. "I didn't only send the ledger," she said. "I sent a note to Jim Alderman, too, telling him what was coming and asking him to get word to the law." She held Blackwell's gaze without wavering. "I wrote both letters last night while Zane was at the window. I've been awake since before the scouts came." A pause. "I told you. This was my fight before it was his." The deputy pulled up at the edge of the yard and looked at the arrangement of bodies and guns with the experienced eye of a man who has walked into the middle of disputes before and knows how to read them fast. "Morning," he said. "I'm Deputy Hale out of Sweetwater. Somebody want to tell me what's happening here?" Blackwell said nothing. "Wade Blackwell," Zane said, "is trespassing on private land and has made threats against this property and its owner. He and his men were just leaving." Hale looked at Blackwell with recognition that wasn't friendly. "Mr. Blackwell, you're a long way from your release paperwork." "I'm within my legal rights," Blackwell said, and his voice had gone to its final register, the formal controlled tone of a man retreating into the language of lawyers. "You've got 5 armed men on a private homestead, and the owner's asking you to leave," Hale said. "That's where your legal rights stop." He looked at the men on either side of Blackwell. "All of you, guns down and hands clear, right now." The man who'd stood with his hands up dropped them and took a step back. The 2 on the south flank exchanged a look and came to the same conclusion, a deputy and 2 more riders with rifles versus 5 hired men and a boss who was already back inside his legal fortress in his head. The math wasn't there. One by one they stood down. Blackwell looked at Zane last. That smile thinner, now stripped of its ease, but still present, because it was the kind of smile a man wears as armor rather than expression. "This isn't finished," he said quietly. "No," Zane said. "It's not. But today it is." Blackwell held his gaze for one more moment, then turned and walked to his horse. They left. 5 men riding south in the morning light. Blackwell in the middle of them, straight-backed and unhurried the way he did everything. The deputy watched them go, and then looked back at Zane and Leia. "You two all right?" he said. "We're all right," Leia said. Hale dismounted and came forward. Jim Alderman's boy came flying into the ranch at a dead gallop, scared 10 years off the old man. He looked at the house, the yard, the position of things. "Told him you were expecting company of the unfriendly kind." He looked at Zane. "You're Tucker." "Yes." "Marshal Briggs in Sweetwater has been wanting to talk to you for 2 weeks." He said it without accusation, just information. "Something about a federal filing." "I know," Zane said. "I'll come in." "Today." Zane looked at his shoulder, at Leia. "Tomorrow," Leia said firmly to Hale. Hale looked at the bandage visible under Zane's shirt and decided not to argue the point. "Tomorrow, then. I'll tell Briggs." He put his hat back on. "Miss Hammond, you might want to get a copy of your deed filed with the Federal Land Office before Blackwell's lawyers file anything further. I'd do it this week. The original filing documents and a complete record of all competing claims are already on their way to Aldous Frick in Sweetwater," she said. "He'll know what to do with them." Hale blinked. "You had that ready?" "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating something. "Right," he said. "Well, you've got my name if you need it." He tipped his hat to her, first then to Zane, and rode back to his two companions, and they turned south without hurry. The yard was empty. The desert was quiet. Zane's arm finally gave out on him, and he let the Colt drop to his side and stood there breathing and letting the shaking come now that it had nobody to impress. His shoulder felt like someone had driven a hot poker through it sideways, which was roughly what had been done to it 4 days ago, and which the last 20 minutes had not improved. Leia was at his side before he could say anything. Her hand went to his arm, steadying, not fussing. "Inside," she said. "I'm all right. You're shaking." "That's the adrenaline leaving." "I know what it is," she said. "Inside anyway." He went inside. She sat him down and unwrapped his shoulder and examined it with the same focused care she'd had on the first day, and he sat still and let her, and the silence in the room was entirely different from any silence that had been in it before. Lighter, changed by what had just happened outside in the specific way that the air changes after a storm breaks. "You didn't tell me," she said, working. "About the federal investigation, about the marshal." "No." "Why not?" He thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because until this morning, I didn't know if it would help or whether saying it out loud would just make Blackwell more dangerous. And because—" He stopped. "Because what?" "Because you'd already done so much," he said. "I didn't want to hand you more weight to carry." Her hand stilled for a moment, then resumed. "That wasn't your decision to make." "I know it. I don't need to be protected from information, Zane." "I know that too." He turned his head to look at her. "I'm sorry. It was wrong of me, and I knew it was wrong while I was doing it, which makes it more wrong, not less." She looked at him for a moment directly, steadily, the way she looked at everything. Then she went back to the bandage. "It held," she said. "The wound. It's angry, but it held." "Good. You'll have a scar. I've got others." "This one will be the most interesting," she said. Something in her voice, so small he almost didn't catch it. Something that was not quite clinical, and not quite not. "Leia." He said her name quietly. "Don't," she said. "I haven't said anything yet. You were about to say something sensible and self-sacrificing about how you need to go to Sweetwater tomorrow, and things are uncertain, and you don't know what Blackwell's lawyers will do next, and you can't make anyone any promises." She tied off the bandage with 2 precise movements. "I've been listening to you for 4 days. I know how you think." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Is it that obvious?" "Yes," she said. "And what would you say," he said carefully, "if I did say something like that?" She sat back and looked at him. Outside, thunder made his contented sound in the lean-to. The fire ticked. Somewhere a long way off, a mockingbird was doing its complicated borrowed song. "I'd say that uncertain is the only kind of thing there is," she said. "My father built this place in uncertainty, He filed that deed in uncertainty. He got up every morning in this desert not knowing what was coming, and he built something worth having anyway. She held his gaze. I didn't sit up all night writing letters and loading a rifle because I was certain of anything. I did it because some things are worth fighting for, even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. She paused. You're one of those things. The words landed and stayed. Zane Tucker, who had ridden through Apache territory and survived 3 gunfights and buried his partner, and sat in a courtroom and looked a dangerous man in the eye. Without flinching, sat in this woman's kitchen with a 4-day-old bullet wound and a rebuilt bandage, and felt for the first time in longer than he could accurately account for that someone had said exactly the true thing to him. I testified for Cal, he said slowly, because I owed it to him, because he couldn't. He searched for words that fit the weight of what he was trying to say. But I stayed here, the part of staying that was a choice, and not just a shoulder that couldn't ride. I stayed because of you. She said nothing, but she didn't look away. I don't know what Blackwell's next move is, he said. I don't know how long the federal case takes or whether Frick can protect your deed before Blackwell's lawyers make a mess of it. I've got nothing settled and nothing certain to offer. He looked at her directly, the way she'd taught him to look at things, without softening, without looking away from what was true. But I'd like to stay and find out, if you'll have me. Leia was quiet for a long moment. The mockingbird outside went through its entire borrowed repertoire and started again. You'll need to work, she said finally. This homestead doesn't run itself. I know how to work. I know you do. She stood and straightened her dress and walked to the fire to put the kettle on, and he could see from where he sat the line of her shoulders and the particular set of them and the smallest possible relaxing of something that had been held very tightly for a very long time. I'll expect that shoulder to be useful within 2 weeks. 2 weeks, he said. Maybe 3, she allowed. He almost smiled. This time he let it happen. Outside, the desert went on being the desert, vast and indifferent and quietly brutal the way it always was. But inside the small house with the cracked ceiling and the fire and the smell of wood smoke and clean linen, something had settled into place that had been unsettled for a very long time. For both of them, the danger wasn't gone. Blackwell was riding south with his lawyers already forming in his mind, and the federal case had months in it yet, and a deed that needed defending, and a ledger making its way to Sweetwater on a boy's quick pony. There were things ahead that would require everything they had between them. But that was tomorrow's reckoning. Today, Leia Hammond poured water into the kettle and set it over the fire, and Zane Tucker sat in her kitchen and breathed without pain for the first time in 4 days, and the mockingbird outside borrowed song, and all didn't stop singing. He rode to Sweetwater the next morning, like he'd promised Deputy Hale he would. Leia saddled Thunder for him. He couldn't lift the saddle properly yet with his right shoulder, and she did it without making a production of it, which he appreciated more than he could have said. She checked the cinch twice, handed him his hat, and stood back. How long? She asked. Couple of days at most. I need to sit down with Marshal Briggs and put everything on record. What Blackwell said in the yard, the witnesses, the deed documents Frick should have by now. He settled the hat on and looked down at her from Thunder's back. I'll be back. I know you will, she said. Not a question, not a reassurance. Just a statement of what she'd already decided was true. He rode out and didn't look back because if he looked back, he wouldn't leave. Sweetwater was 2 days' ride at the pace his shoulder allowed. He arrived mid-afternoon of the second day, found Marshal Briggs in his office above the Land Commission building, and spent 4 hours at a table with a court recorder and 2 federal investigators going through everything. The yard confrontation. Blackwell's exact words. The names of the 5 men, the ledger, the competing deed. Claim the bought witness who'd gotten Blackwell's conviction overturned. He talked until his voice was rough and the recorder's hand was cramping. When he was done, Briggs leaned back in his chair and looked at him with the particular expression of a man who has been waiting a long time for the last piece of something and has just received it. This is enough, Briggs said. For the federal indictment. For 3 of them, Briggs said. Land fraud, witness tampering, and criminal conspiracy across territorial lines. His lawyers can't touch all three at once. Even if they beat one, the others stick. He closed the file. Blackwell's going back to Huntsville Tucker. This time the case is built right. Zane nodded once, slowly. Something that had been holding itself tight in the center of his chest since he'd stood across that courtroom in Abilene 3 years ago and watched Wade Blackwell smile, that thing released. It let go the way a rope lets go when the tension finally exceeds what the fiber can hold. All at once and completely. "And the Hammond deed," he said. "Frick filed it with the Federal Land Commission yesterday morning," Briggs said. "Lone Star Land Consolidated Trust's competing claim has been formally contested and suspended pending the federal fraud investigation. Miss Hammond's title is solid." He paused. "She did good work. Her father did good work. That ledger had dates and documentation going back further than anything else we had." Zane was quiet for a moment. "She kept it because her father kept it," he said. "She didn't even know what it was worth until 3 days ago." "Some people build things right without knowing they'll need them to be right," Briggs said. "That's the best kind of building." Zane stayed one night in Sweetwater in a boarding house that smelled of boiled coffee and old wood, and lay on a real bed staring at a ceiling that didn't have a crack in it, which bothered him more than it should have. He left before full light. He was back at the homestead by the following evening. She heard thunder coming and was on the porch when he rode in, and she didn't run out to meet him or call out or do anything dramatic. She just stood there with her arms crossed and watched him come in. And when he pulled up and dismounted, slower than he used to be, his shoulders still dictating terms, she said, "Well, Briggs has enough for 3 federal charges," he said. "Blackwell's going back." Something moved through her face, relief, but not the kind that surprises a person. The kind that confirms what they'd already made up their mind to believe would happen. "And the deed?" "Filed and protected. Frick moved fast." She nodded, uncrossed her arms. "There's supper on," she said, and went back inside. He took care of Thunder and came in, and she'd made beef stew and cornbread, and there were 2 plates on the table, which meant she'd been expecting him at roughly this time, which meant she'd been calculating the ride from Sweetwater since the morning he left. He didn't mention this because she wouldn't have appreciated having it pointed out. He sat down and ate, and she sat across from him, and they talked through everything. Briggs, the charges, the deed, Frick. And it was the most natural conversation he'd had in years. The kind where the information passes easily because the people passing it trust each other completely. After supper, he helped her clear the table, which she allowed without comment, and then he stood by the window in the last of the evening light and said, without planning to say it quite yet, "I meant what I said about staying." "I know you did. I want to be clear about what I mean by it." He turned from the window. "I'm not talking about a hired hand arrangement. I'm not talking about room and board in exchange for fence work." He held her gaze. "I'm talking about something permanent. Something that's mine as much as it's yours, and yours as much as it's mine." He paused. "I'm talking about building something." Leah looked at him for a long time. In the window behind him, the sky had gone to deep orange, and the desert was doing what it did at that hour, softening briefly into something almost gentle before the cold came on. "My father used to say," she said slowly, "that the only things worth building are the ones you build for keeps." "He was right," Zane said. "He usually was." She looked at her hands on the table. "I've been alone here for 8 months, Zane. Not lonely or not always, but alone." She looked up. "I'd gotten used to it. I'd made a kind of peace with it." Her voice was quiet and precise. "You showed up bleeding on my porch, and in 4 days you unmade that peace entirely, and I find that I don't want it back." He moved to the table and sat down across from her and looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since the second day, directly, without softening, with all the honesty he had. "Leah Hammond," he said, "I have nothing settled and nothing certain. I've got a horse and a gun and a reputation that's going to take time to live down in some counties. I've got a testimony on record with the federal marshal and a friendship with a dead man that I intend to honor the rest of my life." A pause. But I've also got two good hands, one good for a while longer than the other, and I know how to work, and I know how to be steady, and I would like very much to spend however long I've got being steady for you." She looked at him across the table in the last orange light. "That," she said, "is the most words I've heard you say at once." "I've been saving them." She almost smiled. He could see it happening. And then she let it happen fully for the first time, the real one that wasn't controlled or measured or kept behind something. It changed her face in a way that did something to his chest he didn't have language for. "Yes," she said. "Yes, what?" "Yes to all of it," she said. "Yes to permanent. Yes to building." She stood up and carried her plate to the basin with her back to him. "Yes." He sat there for a moment in the silence she'd left behind, and felt for the third time in his life something that was in the general category of joy. The first time had been a morning in Montana when he was 9 years old, and his father had put him on his first real horse. The second time had been standing in a courtroom and saying Cal's name out loud for the record. The third time was here in this small room with this woman's back to him at the basin, and her one quiet word still sitting in the air between them. The weeks that followed were the hardest work of his adult life, and the best weeks of it simultaneously, which he hadn't known were possible at the same time until they were. His shoulder healed. Not fast, and not gracefully, but it healed. Leia changed the dressing every 2 days with the same focused care she'd had on the first night, and she was right about the scar. It was a significant one running along the upper edge of the shoulder in a way that would always be visible. He found he didn't mind it. It marked the place where something had changed. He fixed the fence along the south pasture, which had been going ragged for 2 seasons. He repaired the lean-to roof before the first cold came. He learned the rhythms of the homestead, what needed doing when what Leia had already decided about, and didn't need input on what she was genuinely uncertain about and wanted to think through together. He learned the difference between those two things quickly, because getting them confused was, he discovered the fastest path to a particular kind of silence from her that he didn't enjoy. He learned other things too. That she read every evening for an hour before she slept, and that she'd read every book in the house at least twice. He rode to Sweetwater and came back with 4 new ones from a bookseller on Main Street and set them on the table without explanation, and she picked each one up and looked at the cover and set it down and went to bed without saying anything. And the next evening, she started reading one, and that was that. He learned that she didn't talk much before her first cup of coffee and talked considerably more after it. He learned that she had her father's methodical approach to problems, working through the whole shape of a thing before she said anything about it, and that this sometimes looked like silence, but was actually something much more active than silence. He learned to wait it out, which was not natural to him and which he worked at. She learned things about him too. He could feel it happening, the way she adjusted to him, the way she stopped explaining certain things and started assuming he knew them, the way she called across the yard to tell him something and didn't soften it or frame it. Just said it plainly, the way you say things to someone you're not performing for. He valued that above almost everything. Being with someone who didn't require a performance was, he discovered, a thing he'd been missing longer than he'd realized. Briggs sent word in October that the federal grand jury had returned indictments on all 3 counts. Blackwell's lawyers filed motions within 48 hours, which Briggs had predicted, and which Briggs also predicted would fail, which Zane relayed to Leia that evening while she was going through the account books. She looked up from the ledger. 3 counts. All 3. She looked back down at the accounts, made a small, careful mark in the margin. "Good," she said. He loved her for that. The economy of it. The way she didn't need to perform the relief because she'd already done her grieving and her worrying in private, and this was just the math coming out right. He hadn't said the word love out loud. He was working toward it. In November, Aldous Frick sent a letter confirming that the Hammond deed had been formally entered into the Federal Land Registry with all competing claims dismissed. The letter was 3 paragraphs of careful legal language and 1 final sentence that was not legal language at all. "Your father would be pleased, Miss Hammond." Leia read the letter twice, folded it, set it on the table, walked to the window and stood there for a moment with her back to him. He didn't go to her. He stayed where he was and gave her the space that grief and gratitude share when they arrive at the same moment, which is a space that can't be entered by another person and shouldn't be. After a little while, she turned around. Her eyes were dry. "I want to plant the south field in the spring," she said. "Proper grain, not just the kitchen garden. It needs clearing first." "We can do that," he said. "It'll take most of winter to clear it right. Then we'd better start soon." She looked at him across the room. "We," she said. "We," he agreed. December came in, cold and clear. The way December comes to West Texas, bright sky frost in the mornings. The desert going a different color, as if it had remembered it was capable of subtlety. They worked the south field on the clear days and stayed close to the fire on the bad ones, and in the evenings she read and he worked at whatever wanted. Working at a bridle that needed restitching the chair leg that had been loose since before he arrived. The small, careful things that a home accumulates as evidence that someone is paying attention to it. On the 15th of December, he came in from the barn in the early dark, and she had supper ready, and there were 2 candles on the table, instead of 1, which was not her usual habit, and he stopped in the doorway and looked at the 2 candles and then at her. "Sit down," she said. He sat down. She served supper and sat across from him and said, looking at her plate, "I'd like to be married before the new year." He looked up. "I've thought about it carefully," she said in her precise way. "It makes practical sense, the deed, the property records, the spring planting plans, and it makes—" She stopped, started again. "It makes sense in the other way too, the way that doesn't have anything to do with practical." "Leia, I'm not finished." "All right. I know you were working toward something," she said. "I could see you working toward it. The books you brought, the fence, the way you learned when to talk and when not to." She looked up now directly the way she always did eventually. "I don't need you to keep working toward it. I'm telling you, you're already there." Zane Tucker set his fork down, looked at this woman across the table, her dark eyes and her straight back, and the 2 candles burning between them and the frost on the window behind her, and thought about Cal, who had understood that some things are worth saying out loud even when it costs you. That silence in the end always costs more. "I love you," he said. "I've been meaning to say that for about 6 weeks." She looked at him for a moment. Something in her face, not surprise, but the specific expression of a person who has hoped for a thing and is now receiving it and doesn't quite know what to do with the fullness of that. "I know," she said quietly. And I love you," she said, as if it were the simplest arithmetic she'd ever done. "Which is why I'd like to be married before the new year, if you're agreeable." "I'm agreeable," he said. They were married on the 23rd of December in the small church in Sweetwater, with Deputy Hale and Jim Alderman and his son Thomas as witnesses, and Aldous Frick standing in the back with his hat in his hands. The preacher was a spare, kind man who said exactly what was needed, and nothing more, which suited both of them. Zane put a ring on Leia Hammond's hand. Tucker now, though she kept Hammond alongside it because her father had built something worth keeping his name on, and looked at her in that small, cold church with the winter light coming through the plain glass windows, and said his vows, the way he said everything that mattered, plainly, quietly, and with his whole self behind the words. She said hers the same way. They rode back to the homestead in the afternoon, the desert bright and cold around them, Thunder keeping a steady pace beside Leia's mare, as if he'd always known this was the arrangement. The south field waited half-cleared, ready for spring. The house was warm. The crack in the ceiling was still there, running its crooked river course from one end to the other. They had not come through this easily. They had come through it with a bullet and a fever and a confrontation in a yard and a ledger full of a dead man's careful handwriting, and 2 months of hard work and harder honesty. They had come through it, the only way anything real is ever come through, one day at a time, one choice at a time. One true word said out loud when the silence would have been easier. In the spring, they planted the south field, and it grew. And that was how Zane Tucker, who had ridden into Liah Hammond's life with a bounty hunter's bullet still inside him and nowhere left to go, built something that neither of them, the land, the deed, the life the love would ever have to run from again.